I said, thank you very much for having me on this program. And with your first loaded question, I think it is significant to begin to engage in that type of conversation between the purely political partisan interests and Ghana's national interests. The simple answer one can give to this is that keeping us divided along partisan political lines certainly have beneficiaries. And I think those beneficiaries are sufficiently powerful in society. And anytime you begin to see our society coming together to address a number of issues, it just fizzles out because people will introduce the politically partisan considerations at almost every stage of very important discussions on national issues. And so, if there are no beneficiaries of such a situation, I certainly believe we would be able to come together. Just watch our social interaction. When it's a funeral, it's very difficult for you to tell who belongs to a political party. When it is a wedding, when there are festive occasions, even when it is football, we begin to see a convergence of interest about Ghana and not about a particular political party. And I think we need to take a closer look at this. Definitely, in a multi-party democratic dispensation, almost everybody will either belong to a political party or sympathize with a political party, or more significantly, vote for a political party. So we all have our preferences. But if you take the essential elements that you put together to constitute a democratic country, electing people along partisan lines is just one tiny bit. In fact, it's the first step on a ladder upwards to higher values that needs to be achieved. And so electoral democracy cannot be substituted for democracy. As you said in your intro, at the end of the day, we should not just elect people along partisan political lines and leave them to their designs for 4 years. And in between the election cycles, nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to be interested. Of course, complaints will come from time to time based on a number of policies of government. But we've not been able to concretely build teams of what unite us as a people and use that as a galvanizing a framework within which we can bring the energies of all Ghanaians on board. And I always say that so many people can achieve so much if it doesn't matter who takes the credit. This is the case because at almost every point, every political party in power keeps making these disturbing statements. Individuals suddenly become the ones who are bringing development in a very, very bizarre manner. You come and tell us to pay our taxes as a civic obligation, and that those taxes will be used to develop the country. After we have paid the taxes, you turn around and said, you have brought this market, you have brought this KVIP toilet, you have brought... Nobody really develops a people in contemporary times. Governments only create the enabling environment and provide the facilitating infrastructure for people to develop themselves. Do you know what people consider to be their development? So the mere fact that we've been appointed into political leadership shouldn't give us that impression that we are now more knowledgeable about what improves the human condition and what is good for every Ghanaian. And that's why some major development initiatives ought to be put to a national dialogue. Even watch the priorities of our development. We all know clearly that if we were to prioritize development initiatives, some of the infrastructure that we have are really unnecessary. Some have stayed for 25 years with a lot of money sunk in, and they are not completed. You can't tell me this is the type of development the people want. And that is why I think that all these things are becoming possible, because we seem to focus and are more interested in things that divide us than on things that unite us. And it is because in between the electorate and the government, it's a space that has been created where some known beneficiaries have nested very comfortably and would make sure that you keep this divide within the country. If we're able to remove that incentive that motivates this group of people of occupying that particular space, I believe we'll begin to see a convergence in terms of our national interest. This, my initial remarks on that issue.
Right. Dr. Bedian-Kumbo, I have known you beyond the screens. Like many people are connecting to you through the screens, even when you offered yourself and worked in Parliament and out of Parliament. I am very intrigued listening to you and getting your students confirm almost unanimously your depth of knowledge. When you are teaching, you are referring to a dozen books, different books, and you demonstrate that you have read all. In fact, in such detail that you remember very minor things in them. So, what exactly is the problem? I've heard you speak to students graduating law students and focus on the question of values, values, values. Is that the missing link?
Certainly, that is it. When you see somebody or a group of people who are active and do not have a value system, perhaps they are just acting and they might not be different from robots. You must have a particular value system. We don't all have to share the same values, but I want everybody to justify his action, his decisions, based on values that I might disagree with. But one of the things that we seems to be lacking in this country is at least a belief in a value system. And values are important, whether they come from moral society, they come from the ideological society. At least it gives us a basis for us to have a conversation so that I know where you are coming from. So we can all agree that these are our development imperatives. But for moral, religious, ideological reasons, we might differ as to how we approach. And there are so many common themes or development themes in this country that we all agree on. Most rural communities will want pipe-borne water. Most rural communities will want a good educational system. Most people would want that with us entering cyberspace, we should not be having a situation in which some people still use hoe and cutlass to farm. Like I kept telling you people about the interesting thing I find out about postmodernist thought is that I have visited a number of communities and have found a very, very interesting representation of postmodernism. Here is a man farming with a hoe and cutlass. A radio is by him and he's listening to it. And then he has got what? A mobile phone in that rural farm. Have we reached the technological age or the postmodern age? Are we in the industrial age? Are we still part of a feudal system? And this, for me, creates a problem. We have not become solely modern, let alone to be postmodern. We are still trapped in a number of practices that are very traditional and feudal in essence. And we have been coming out with development policies in which people have free cyberspace, and we are still saying the major challenge we have is to create industries. And the concept of industrialization we have in Ghana is very much like the loom technology that we had initially during the Industrial Revolution and the mechanization of the production process. When you are caught up in this type of situation, that you are not traditional, you are not you want to be modern, you even want to be part of the postmodern experience. Who exactly are you? And if you do not know who you are, you might not even be able to articulate your interests. And this is where the value system becomes important. If we have a value system will be very clear in our mind that when we pretend that we are going to achieve so much and we are going to do A, B, C, D, only to realize the fact that you don't control your economy. Your budget is literally subsidized by external sources. And there is not a freebie situation. Before people can give you budgetary support, they would want their interest in the global transactional exchanges, taking forefront in that. So you don't control your economy. What is all this talk about? I'm bringing development to my people. And these, for me, are the issue. And a typical value we need to have is national ownership of our development initiatives. No matter what, if you do not have ownership, it is as if somebody must come and tell me when I'm hungry. Somebody must put in a book and define poverty for me to appreciate the level of poverty in Ghana. In this country, we opted for a constitutional dispensation with a very, very elaborate constitution. In that constitution, the development objectives and priorities are set up in the directive principles of state policy. But that seems to be the chapter in the constitution that every Ghanaian who takes policy decisions seems to be running away from. Because if we were to look at the social, economic, and all the other objectives that are contained there, that is what builds a national vision. We can then distill our policies, our political party manifestos around these objectives. Then it becomes a shared text in which national ownership can be part of it. But it's like, let the directive principles be there. We will all come and we will promise heaven. We will promise things that the Constitution itself anticipates are not feasible within the Ghanaian context. Particularly if you take a profession where they tell you that the most secure democracy is economic democracy. Right. What sense do we make of that particular provision in our Constitution? And that is why I think that we seem to be behaving like somebody who is trying to trap birds in the typical village environment. He catches one bird and goes to put it in the cage and leaves the cage open and go chasing after other birds that are not in the cage. By the time he gets back, the birds in the cage have also left. And the person is involved in an exercise in futility. Let's get a think tank and distill and put into practical form what exactly the objectives in our directive principles for state policies. Secondly, and in a very brief form, let's not celebrate this concept that winner takes all in a democratic dispensation. There is no taking in a democratic system. There is service. But if we keep saying we are operating the winner take all what exactly are you there to take? You've been elected to serve the people of this country and not to be involved in takings and non-takings. And so when the fight between political parties is about who is taking more than the others, you hear the criticisms on one side, and it is like, if we allow this taking to continue, by the time we come, it's finished. Now, when you start debating and engaging national issues from this purely parochial perspective, you are going to have a problem. And lastly, and for God's sake, let us all as a country begin to think of intergenerational equity. That what we have come to meet, we should anticipate that another generation should benefit from it, from even an improved context. Okay. But what we are doing now is just dissipating even what nature has given us, dissipating what our forebears have put in place in terms of basic social infrastructure, and even now dissipating ourselves in the political arena. And I think these are the hard issues that we need to look at. And I would be very sad to hear anybody again, and a politician in particular, go and say that I brought this development, I'm bringing this, I did this. No, you do not bring development. I want to emphasize that. And the citizenry must tell the politicians, we the politicians, I include myself, that I am not asking you to bring me your concept of development. I'm asking you to use our taxes to build the enabling environment, and we will develop ourselves.
Okay.
I think that is significant.
I think 2022 is going to be one of those years where the revenue prospects of the government assumes outsized proportions. It's going to be so important that I wanted to dedicate my time to talk a little bit about it. I'm having a bit of a challenge with my screen, but it's worked momentarily. One of the most objective ways of trying to understand the pressure that is on government revenues is to look at government borrowing. Every serious government borrows, and in the course of doing that, those that have access to international markets borrow internationally. And if you borrow internationally, you are exposed to a wide range of investors who are therefore able to measure the fundamentals in your economy and determine whether or not you are credit worthy. So that's a very important point. If your country is credit worthy, investors will typically charge you less to lend to you. If you're not credit worthy, they charge you more. So one of the most objective ways of determining whether your country is credit worthy is often to look at how much investors will charge you in order to lend to you. And we've seen over the last couple of months seriously worsening perceptions from investors around the world about Ghana's credit worthiness. I'm showing you two graphs that I pick up from Fitch and Bloomberg. That one of them suggesting that Ghana's bonds were the worst performing towards the last quarter of last year. So this has been quite a while coming. And we are grouped in, with the likes of Lebanon, which is almost effectively insolvent at this stage, technically in some respects. Tunisia, which is seeing a serious headwinds. Ethiopia, which is in war, etc. We've also seen, though, that long before this recent crisis, investors generally, if you look at the left graph, have been charging Ghana more to lend to Ghana. So a lot of the time we talk about oversubscription and things like that. We are forgetting the fact that part of the reason why there's demand for Ghana's issues is because when we issue, we pay a lot. But that is also a sign that your economy is not considered sufficiently creditworthy. So this is not something that is a COVID phenomenon. This is something we've been dealing with for quite a while. And you can see from the graph that all the way from February 2020, we were already paying up to 1.5% more than our African compatriots. And then today, we're still paying more than 1% more than African compatriots. So for the average African borrower, our credit worthiness has been lower. That's a very important point. Now, the question is why? A lot of that can be seen when you look at the average debt of a country compared to the average size of the economy. So on the left, which is a chart I pick up from the Economist Intelligence Unit, you can see that the average African country owes about 40%, owes money equivalent to about 40% of the total size of its economy. That's about less than half. Ghana owes about 83%. So essentially, our debt to GDP ratio is about 83% today. And that is way above the African average, considerably above the African average. We are also, as has already been mentioned, spending maybe 45% of all the money that we make in the country on servicing our debt, and a good chunk of the rest on paying government workers, who may constitute maybe 10% or so of the total workforce. So when you add all of it together and you add the statutory payments that government has to make, where government has very little discretion, just has to make those payments. Almost everything else that you hear the government promising around, they literally have to go and borrow and do. That is quite critical. So this was the context in which yesterday, Fitch, one of the three main ratings agencies, decided to downgrade Ghana to B- from B, and then on top of that, revise the outlook to negative, meaning that if things don't change, they intend to downgrade Ghana further. What does that really mean? This is a simple chart that gives you an idea of how typically you rate a borrower internationally. In this case, I'm talking about sovereign ratings particularly, but let's not delve into that yet. All I'm saying is that typically you rate a country whether or not it's creditworthy using this set of ratings. So the most creditworthy countries are AAA. In the case of Fitch, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's, which are the three biggest global rating agencies. And then if you are in distress, that means that you are completely bankrupt or insolvent, you can't pay your debts, you get a D rating. Now, more or less, there are very few countries that are in this D rating category, and only about 11 countries are in this C rating. So when we say we are B- in Fitch, we are just one step from being considered almost in default because we have substantial risks to our economy. So we've moved to B-, but if they say the outlook is negative, then it means that if we don't change certain things, we could literally drop into the substantial risks area because we are now on the very speculative credit rating band. So in essence, the B- rating with a negative outlook shows that we are really, really close to the level where if we don't pay attention to our fiscal dynamics, we could go into default. What is more fascinating is that usually Fitch, if you look at the numbers very carefully, has been generally, I'll not say lax, but they've been generally less strict on Ghana compared to some of the other agencies. Moody's has left us at B3 for quite a while. Generally, Fitch has been, and this graph, what this graph shows you is that if you compare how costly our our borrowings are, which gives you an indication of how investors perceive our creditworthiness, and you consider the actual ratings we get, you see a significant gap. Meaning that if you were to be less charitable, we should have been in that B- rating longer. This is from 2016, but we were still in B rating. Now, what makes this particular situation interesting is that Fitch has never rated us B- since it started rating us in December 2003. This is the first time it's ever done that, with a negative outlook on top of that. Only two other countries that were our peers, our B- peers, have had their outlook revised to negative by Fitch, essentially El Salvador and Tunisia. So this is not a company you want to be in. We've only had this instance twice by another ratings agencies, Moody's, in our history. And this is a history that dates back to 2003 when we had our first sovereign rating, following on from Senegal, which was the first country in Africa to actually acquire one. The government of Ghana, when you talk to them and when they talk to the public, tries to explain this reason why we are where we are, primarily around the fact that given the size of our economy, not enough people pay tax. Well, that may well be true, but the question is in comparison to whom or to what or to where. I mean, if the fact of the matter was that most other countries suffer similar problems, then we wouldn't have a discussion. So normally they will show you a graph like this or a chart like this that would suggest that Ghana is well below the African average. This is from 2018, but recent numbers are not that different. Ghana is well below the African average of around 16%. Sub-Saharan average right now is around 15-point-something%. And Ghana is today around 15%, but at that time 14%. So in essence, we are below the African average. When you take the size of our economy and how much tax we're raking, we are below the African average. That's usually how the government explains why it needs stronger revenue measures. So as far as the government is concerned, it's a problem of tax collection. It's primarily how it's not collecting enough taxes from people who can afford to pay. The problem is that when you look at that chart very carefully, you will see that there are some countries that are clustered with us. Cote d'Ivoire, Botswana, Uganda, Madagascar, Congo, DRC, Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria. So for instance, Nigeria takes about only 6% of its GDP equivalent in taxes. we are several times better than Nigeria in that regard. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what is it about those countries where apparently the government is not able to collect enough taxes compared to its GDP that enables you to kind of draw some objective conclusions? And the one thing that is similar among all of them is that they have high dependency on natural resources. They are major commodity exporters. And where that features in, typically you have lower tax collection because of the nature of extractive industries. The nature of those industries are such that they are not as taxable, but that does not mean, therefore, that they don't contribute to GDP in other ways. So they may multiply GDP and not necessarily give you enough tax. So it's a trade-off. And that is why when you look critically at the countries that have very significant contributions to GDP from mining and quarrying and oil and other factors, Ghana is very high up there. So it is not surprising. Then you say, well, is this a peculiar African issue? And the answer is actually no. If you go around the world, you see similar dynamics. Australia is one of the richest countries in natural resources. And you find out that in Australia, their tax take compared to GDP is about 24%. Whereas in France, it can go as high as 45%. So you see clearly that, and even if you take economies that are very similar, very close to each other, say in Scandinavia, you find that Norway gets about 25% tax to GDP ratio, Denmark hitting 48%. These are very similar countries in almost every other respect. The only difference is that Norway is very rich in natural resources, and the taxation effect of natural resources have a certain character. The other point is also that we have to look at the way that our tax structure, so I'm looking into administration and structure and saying that it's not just about collection. We have a huge emphasis on VAT collection. We don't do social security taxes a lot because of the nature of our employment. Not too many people are employed in a way that you can tax them on social security. And for that reason, and the fact that our VAT also tends to be inefficient compared to other countries, even within Africa. So you can see Ghana somewhere there in terms of VAT tax gap. You will have issues with the tax take compared to GDP. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not collecting as efficiently as you could. It could also mean the way in which the tax composition has an effect. In short, if you don't diagnose the problem correctly, and here I'm arguing that we are not necessarily bad compared to our African peers from a collection point of view, it's just the nature of the economy and the structure of the tax administration system. And if that is the diagnosis, and if therefore the government's usual diagnosis is not correct, my argument is you may find out that some of the measures that you then propose are not as effective as you thought they would be. Now we look at the famous Momo tax, which is government's decision to bank a lot of political capital on yield levy, which sentiment surveys show is highly unpopular. There are a lot of MPs in marginal seats that are going to take a hit because in places like Accra and the rest, where those seats are not safe seats, you introduce a tax that will worsen people's cost of living situations. It will affect you electorally. Why is the government banking so much on this? Is because it thinks that this is all a matter of collection, and all it has to do is find ways to collect more. And in so doing, this is a great tax. Our analysis suggests that, well, it may not make that much money from the tax. So the $1.15 billion may not come due to behavioral changes that will occasion as a result of the tax, and we've seen it elsewhere. The second point we're also making is that if the tax is not well designed, it may lead to a deformalization of the digital sector. What that means is that people's behavior patterns will be to evade the tax, and in so doing, rather more of those young entrepreneurs selling on Instagram and social media and elsewhere, joining the formal sector, they may actually leave the formal sector because they are trying to hide from Momo tax, etc. And lastly, if you want to do proper design of that tax, you need sound consultations around issues such as what should be the rate, who should be actually exempted, what should be the cap, etc. All of those things need real modeling, and nobody has shown us any modeling. Nobody has shown us that if we use this and that, here will be the output. All we've been told is just simply accept it. And we are saying that combination emerges from a general tendency to diagnose the problem wrongly and then to prescribe the wrong solution. We know also from case studies elsewhere, it's about 7 countries that have experimented with this Momo tax or digital taxation approach. And if you take Uganda, and actually Kenya has been doing this since 2013. So this is not something new or novel or innovative. We know it quite well. Uganda has been doing this for almost 3.5 years. And what has it told us? What it told us is that it does not bring a lot of money. So if we adjust for Uganda's smaller volumes, they do about 22 billion. We do about 100 billion in Momo. They have a smaller rate, 0.5%, and that was because there were protests in Kampala that forced the government to retreat. So we were thinking of 1.75%. If you adjust for those differences, you find out that Uganda did maybe $27 million last year. If we use the same factors and you extrapolate for Ghana, we may make maybe about $350 million from that tax. But as I've explained, there are trade-offs there that also tells you that the efficiency of that tax is not very high. MTN gets about 90% of all the Momo in the country. And last year, it made about $260 million from the tax, from fees. Okay. So that all of those things tell you that they may not get a lot. And then if that leads to behavioral changes that formalizes the sector, it interferes with a major project that the Ghana Revenue Authority is currently undergoing, which is an attempt to tax the digital economy as a whole. And that is taxing value in the economy. So if you sell your watch on Instagram, how do we tax you? That's a much bigger problem if a lot more people are going to move into using the digital sector. Otherwise, the digital tools merely become additional instruments to deformalize the economy. Okay. To end it all, let me just simply say that what I've been trying to say is the government has been misdiagnosing the problem of revenue. Part of the reason being misdiagnosing is that too many people in the room think alike. So they have an echo chamber. Too many partisan people that are completely beholden to the political party. They cannot have the same degree of robust debate you need to bring fresh ideas in the room. And the government has to open up, given the particular parliament we have, into a bipartisan, rigorous debate approach to making policy. So what that means is that you don't go into the room with a fait accompli. We are going to impose E-levy. End of story. You go into the room saying, we have a problem with revenue. How do we solve it? And more ideas then come in. Okay. Some of the opposition MPs also bring ideas. And then through that effort, you get the best ideas possible. Sorry for going over my allotted time. This was slightly more complex than usual. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Professor Techiman Menu, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Samson, and good morning again, and good morning to my fellow panelists and to the many people who are listening or watching us across Ghana. So, Samson, let me attempt to congratulate you and your team for your attempt at gender parity. I'm sure that this must be one of the few programs where there has been an attempt, not quite successful, given our proportions in the population, to ensure that women's voices are heard. And thank you also for inviting me to this, your retrospective. I hope that as the year goes on, mid-year, you can also congregate for us to look at how things are going, so some things can be tweaked before the end of the year. You know, I think notwithstanding how people look, I must be the oldest person on this panel. Stephen Masari can disagree, Dr. Kumbo can disagree. I'm turning 70 in May, so I know that I'm the oldest person on this panel. So listening to both Dr. Kumbo and Dr. Priscilla Chuensi-Bafo, some of the issues that they've spoken about, I feel like it's like something that is stuck in the groove. It's like, you know, we've been hearing the same things over and over again. And you're asking yourself, is anybody listening? When I listened to Bryce Simmons just share his PowerPoint right now, you know what I was thinking, Samson, that I'm looking forward to you assembling the Minister of Finance, Bryce Simmons, and a whole number of other people on your program to speak to these issues, because sometimes it's almost like, you know, why are you always bringing people who are saying these things? Why are you not bringing them together with what you call the authority holders or office bearers or something? I think they are ordinary citizens, because we don't often get this dialogue between the citizenry and the office holders. We read of interviews that they give to you know, foreign journalists, etc. But we don't have enough of this. So this is my charge to you, that really all these issues, whether it's on employment, whether it's on the direction of the economy or the Euro bonds and the Africa bonds and whatever, that we can have some dialogue on these matters.
Thank you very much. I can assure you that we'll take this cue.
Thank you. So going on to my issues, and I also want to stress that, of course, we are all interested in the different issues that are being articulated here. When I listen to both Dr. Kumbo and Dr. Chumesi Bafo to Dr. Simmons, I can see because what I'm going to talk about, it's almost like the fallout of all these things, the insecurities that are generated in our national politics and in our economy, you know, get pushed onto other people who are usually more vulnerable. So I'll speak very briefly on the promotion of the proper human sexual rights and Ghanaian family values bill, quite a mouthful, 2021. It is still pending, and we, at this stage, we are pleased that we got a hearing from the committee, and we'll be looking forward to the committee's work as the year goes on. I just wanted to say something small about this. This week, I heard the Minister of Information on the Probe, one of your sister programs, talk about the genesis of the bill. And I think that it's not correct. Okay, so he's saying that for his words were that for centuries, Ghanaians have lived with people of different sexualities. They haven't done any, Ghanaians have not reacted, but that they were, and this is my word, they were provoked when gays and lesbians tried to set up a cultural center to kind of promote their lifestyle. That is what people found intolerable. And yet when you go to the promoters, as in May 2018, the national coordinator, Mr. Foamweni, was vowing to have a bill passed by the end of 2018. So it is not new. The bill is not new. And I'd suggest that for anybody who cares, they go through the history, the archives, to see the genesis of this bill. You know, so it's been a work in progress for a long time. It is still a work in progress. The outcome is not, and I agree with the minister here, the outcome is not guaranteed at all. But for many of us, as you have been insisting, the Constitution is our grundnorm, right? It is the fount of everything. So in everything that we do, we must go to our Constitution. We must also go to the different conventions and treaties that we are part of and see whether our intended acts sync with those commitments that we have put on ourselves. Now, the main things I wanted to speak about were issues around gender equality. And last year, I guess there was a high when we had a trio of female principal officers appointed or come into office at the University of Ghana.
That's right.
This was a first, not only for Ghana, but in the world. I don't believe that you will find any institution in the world where concurrently the Vice Chancellor, the Registrar, the Chancellor, the Chair of Council, the Chief Academic Officer, the Legal Counsel are all female, okay? So this is one positive thing that happened last year. What does it say to me? What it says to me is that we have a lot of qualified persons and a lot of qualified women in Ghana. And I expect you and everybody else to reflect this talent in your programs, in the appointments, etc., that occur in this country. It is really important. Ghanaian women have served Ghana. They serve in our communities, our mothers, all the, as somebody says, because we don't give them names, right? The home economists and the human resource managers in our homes who are able to make magic with often very meager resources, okay? And they have served at the continental and in the international level. And yet, Ghana still lags behind. I was thinking yesterday, 2 days ago, I went to watch the documentary When Women Speak. which I recommend to all of you.
Okay.
And we know that more than 50 years ago, 1959, Ghana pioneered in affirmative action when it passed the Representation of the People Women Members Act by not, it made, but in the end, it was not elected. They were selected, appointed. 10 women at the time in the 110 or 90-person cabinet parliament at the time. More than 50 years later, what is our record? We live in a sub-region which is, a poor neighborhood. But even in this poor neighborhood, Ghana is far behind Senegal, Ghana is far behind Cape Verde and other places. And we have not really done well. And we know that there has been an attempt at legislating affirmative action policy, first as a cabinet directive in the 1990s, and later from the 2000s, we've gone to Parliament, and each time the bill has died with Parliament. So we have had no private members bill to push affirmative action, and there just seems to be no interest. And we talk about this in the film, and in the end, I think the clear conclusion is that men who have the power do not want to share it, because when the affirmative action bill comes into law, many things are going to have to change. So really, it's not good enough. We will begin the process again. This is the end of 1 year, and we know that in 2023, people will be all focused on elections, etc. So Ghana, and with our president as the African Union gender champion, etc., we really have not done well on affirmative action, and we need to do better.
Okay.
Now, the other thing I wanted to speak about in terms of gender equality was the spate of wife and girlfriend killings, femicides, that rocked Ghana in 2021. Between January and August 2021, NetRights, the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana, recorded over 21 women who were murdered. And for us, it resembled 1999, 2000, when we had a spate of killings of women, murders of women around Accra, mostly. There were 1 or 2 in Kumasi, but mostly Accra. And for us, this reflects the insecurities that women face in their communities and in their homes. And much of this insecurity is derived from the larger processes that both Priscilla and Bright were speaking about, the national and personal insecurities, which then get deflected on women who are accused of witchcraft, who, everybody just vents their frustrations on them. The men vent their frustrations on these women. And sometimes in what happened last year, women were killed, sometimes even with their children or in front of their children. Now, of course, this is not a miracle. The 2019 study that ISA at the University of Ghana conducted on the economic and social cost of violence against women found that 43% of currently partnered women in intimate relations had suffered gender-based violence. And what they did in that study was to document the cost, both the human, the social, the psychological, as well as the economic and productivity costs of violence against women. Some of the conclusions that were suggested was that, and also in the NetRights statement, was that there should be the creation of safe spaces for women. There should be more action from government, from the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, from the police and DOFSU, etc., but also from our schools and educational institutions and the homes on the whole culture of respect and peace and tolerance. Dr. Kumbwa was talking about values, and I think that values need to be approached in a holistic manner, that respect for women and for gender equality, for tolerance, should be part of the values that we inculcate in our young people throughout our lives. And so that when people grow, these are not things that they are having to learn. I think that this is important, that we begin to understand that we cannot develop this society without more than half of its talent, that all the issues that we're speaking about inure to women as well as men, and that women are human beings, they are citizens, they have rights, and those rights need to be respected.
Prof, about women representation in governance, say in parliament and also in the ministries. The Global Parliament, that is the IPU, Inter-Parliamentary Union, is requiring that for countries that are still not doing well, they must have at least 30% of women representation by, I think, 2024, or they will be reduced in the Global Parliament to observer status. What can we also do to force, some of these things to happen? Because it must happen.
Thank you. I think that when it begins to hurt, then we begin to take things more seriously. Culture is often used as a defense. And yet look at Senegal. It's a Muslim-dominant country. It passed the gender parity law, and it has 50% women in its parliament. It doesn't mean that in other areas of the society that representation is equal. So I think that, first of all, we need to trumpet that. We need to ask our president respectfully what being the AU champion, gender champion, means concretely in the area of Ghana. I think that 2 or so years ago, the president went to Vancouver to the Women Deliver conference, where he ruffled some feathers and was in turn ruffled in his remarks. So I think that certainly the gender advocates, and here we do not just want it restricted to gender advocates.
Right.
We want Bryce Simmons, all the different CSOs to come together, because this is not just a fight by women. It is a fight about women, about gender equality, about the direction of our societies. So we want it not to be seen as, oh, this is something, a problem for women. It is a problem for society, of society, and we see it in its impact. We find that when, these women who are killed, their mothers, their sisters, their daughters, it hurts a lot of people. It hurts their children, it hurts the communities, it hurts the society. So I think that more and more society must reflect it. And that's why I talk about the power of educational institutions, the power of our churches, the power of our traditional authorities and communities. We need a uniform and a consensual voice on this matter.
Prof, I find something rather curious that, for example, at the universities, we don't particularly see that there's any deliberate policy. But for example, at the University of Ghana, at least the last few years, we continue to see, for example, at the law school, that the enrollment, women have overtaken the females have overtaken males, to a point where you have had almost over 70% of a law class being women. So how is this? It's curious to me, because there's no deliberate policy, and yet this is going on. Very good.
Yes, it is good. But when you begin to look at the statistics, recently I was doing a proposal and I was shocked. When you get to the professoriate, the percentages have not changed much over time. A lot of female in the academy are still clustered in the lecturer and senior lecturer positions. Many who are quite talented do not go beyond senior lecturerships. Not always because they do not have the talent, Sometimes their juggling of domestic and other responsibilities do not allow it. Sometimes they also do it for very practical reasons. Huh? Your husband is Mr. Somebody, and you're going to be working with Mr. and Mrs. Professor so-and-so, and some of the women censor themselves. They won't even dare. I think that many more should try and do it and let their husbands also enjoy the partnership of having professors as wives. But the law faculty, but if you went to medicine, you may not find that same cluster, you know.
That's right.
So it's interesting, and maybe we need some detailed studies of how in some clusters this is happening, and yet in other clusters when you go into the physics and engineering. But interestingly, you know, I read a study recently in Benin. They have parity, gender parity in engineering between males and females. So there's a lot happening. Some of what you say globally, if you go to, let's say, American universities, you find that there are so many females there in PhD courses, etc. And of course, the fact that women are represented there does not necessarily mean that their status is improving in society, but it is important. So I think that this Interparliamentary Union reduction of observer status may begin to send a signal, because you know we have all these safe seats which political parties could easily put women in, and they will not do it. They say this is competitive. When it comes, you know, the women should also come in and elbow it out with us.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Samson, for having me. And let me say I've enjoyed listening to the previous speakers, Dr. Chumesi Bafo, Mr. Simmons, Dr. Kumbo, Professor Menu. And by the way, Professor Menu, enjoy your platinum years. Congratulations. You just look marvelous.
Yes.
Unlike the previous speakers who have spoken about something very interesting, I've chosen a dry, but what I consider an important topic. And the reason it's important is because of something my good friend, Dr. Kumbo, just said. He mentioned that people both on the NDC and the NPP side, when they are in government, run away from the directive principles of state. That's part of the Constitution. And so how do they get away with running away from it? And that is why my topic is going to be about enhancing constitutional obedience and enforcement, because we don't do that enough. We don't do that enough. But before I go ahead and give you my 13 recommendations for doing more obedience and enforcement of the Constitution, let me start by observing that we just celebrated the 29th anniversary of the promulgation of this Constitution.
That's right.
That's remarkable. If you think about it, that's remarkable. Here are about 3-4 reasons why every Ghanaian should be proud of that accomplishment. Number one, the Constitution is sandwiched between December 31st and January 13th. On December 31st, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the so-called revolution. And just a few days ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the so-called redemption. So what you have is a constitution celebration that is sandwiched between these two radical coup events. Consider that before this constitution, we had about 5, some would say 6 constitutions in 35 years. Consider also that globally, the mean longevity of a constitution is about only 17 years. That's the mean. The median is 8 years, and frankly, the mode is 1 year. Such longevity as we have enjoyed was one thought to be capable of being enjoyed by only the Anglo-Saxons, who tease the French that their constitution is like a periodical. It's published every few years. So Ghanaians have something to celebrate in the fact that our constitution is 29 years. Longevity matters because the basic functions of a constitution are to express guiding national principles, establish basic rules, and limit the power of government, all of which presuppose enduring values and intergenerational commitment to preserving the principles. Instability of a constitution can weaken the very notion that it is the supreme law of a country. Of course, like all creations of mankind, the Constitution is undoubtedly imperfect. But I'm of the firm view that it is imprudent to jettison it, because there are people who are calling for that, for the irrational pursuit of another constitution, which assuredly would also be imperfect because it's a creation of mankind. I therefore stand with those who believe that whatever problems we have with the Constitution should be addressed with litigation, legislation, and ultimately amendments. For surely it is an easier proposition to contemplate one or two amendments and vote on those one or two amendments than to be given a new book of 300 articles and to vote yes or no on 300 articles. That, to me, is irrational and will not produce an outcome that is considerably better than what we have now. Now, Samson, in the period immediately after its promulgation, political parties, businesses, civil society, and individuals trooped to the courts under Article 2 to seek the enforcement of the basic structure and promises of the Constitution. The court obliged with timely and, frankly, sometimes very impressive judgments. December 31, MPP versus GBC, which upheld the promise of equal opportunity to the airwaves. J.H. Mensah versus AG, which rejected carryover appointments. Tenadi, which decided that the right to vote cannot be fettered by unreasonable registration requirements, and so on. My concern is that over time, constitutional enforcement and justice have become too slow, too expensive, too technical, too narrow, too unpredictable, too incomprehensible, and in the process have outpriced the poor and disadvantaged, have outlawyered the non-lawyers, and have increasingly blocked the pathway that the Constitution opened for even the determined and knowledgeable private solicitors general who seek to enforce the document. I cannot pretend to know the cause of this backslide. All I know is that there's a backslide. Perhaps the excitement of operating in this constitutional ecosystem has waned over time. Whatever it is, I do believe that the enforcement problems have eroded public confidence in the court as an enforcer and sentinel of the Constitution. In turn, enthusiasm about enforcing the Constitution has waned considerably. This is the reason why we have SAL, which nobody seems interested in rushing to the court to seek enforcement. This is the reason why, up till now, we don't know whether the Auditor General was properly removed. This is why the General Legal Counsel insists on a monopoly, contrary to Article 25(2) of the Constitution, which provides that private participants should not be obstructed at any level in providing education. I contend that this trust deficit more than the Constitution's imperfection, is the imminent threat to the sustainability and survival of the Constitution. In a sense, then, to me, the Constitution is only as good as the court enforces it. And the courts, therefore, the Constitution is good only to the extent that the public has confidence in it. Public trust and confidence in the court are therefore a prerequisite for the public to consider it as a credible forum for enforcement of the constitutional promises. My mission today, then, is simply to reflect on the extent to which the Constitution's promises are being enforced and to propose 13 ideas on how we can strengthen this obedience and enforcement.
All right.
Number one, we need to rethink the entire litigation system under Article 2. Because under Article 2, everyone is made a private solicitor general. That basically means the court's enforcement jurisdiction is not just original, but it is also epistolic. If it is epistolic, that is, if it is open to the ordinary man, then the court needs to move away from the traditional model of litigation, which is pregnant with technicalities, and focus more on reducing the burden on the individual who seeks to enforce the Constitution. A good example of that is in the United States case of Gideon versus Wainwright, where the plaintiff, Gideon, wrote his writ to the Supreme Court in jail, in pencil, on jail letterhead. The Constitution, the US Supreme Court just set aside all the technicalities and accepted the writ, heard the case, and Gideon versus Wainwright is why criminal accused persons have the right to counsel in the United States today. Another example of a country that has perfected this is India, where basically the Supreme Court allows ordinary people to write a letter to them. And in that letter, express any frustrations that they have with the Constitution in terms of their rights being trampled upon and so on. And the Supreme Court pronounces on that. This concept is not entirely new in the Ghanaian jurisprudential space, because if you look at Luke Mensah of Sunyani versus Attorney General, and I'd like to read what Justice Akwa said. We are convinced that as the highest court of the land, charged with the constitutional authority to interpret and enforce the Constitution, and thereby promote rule of law in our society, we should, in fitting situations, rise up to the occasion and determine disputes likely to endanger our infant democracy. Now, having regards to the intense public controversy generated by the EC's decision, we decided that notwithstanding whatever flaws in the plaintiff's action, we would go into the merit of the case. Justice Akwa was basically acknowledging the epistolary jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Number two, I believe we need to develop enforcement timelines. Constitutional enforcement should be speedy and inexpensive. Otherwise, it subverts the constitutional scheme to protect and uphold rights. For instance, I'm going to say the Supreme Court should commit to hear all constitutional enforcement cases within 180 days, sometimes shorter, depending on the nature of the problem. So, for instance, if a president decides that he's going to remove a chief justice from office, the court should not engage itself in technicalities and go on vacation while the president has removed the chief justice from office. They should stop whatever they are doing, hear that case, and preserve the constitutional basic structure.
If we can go, through the rest of the list a bit quickly, thank you so very much.
Sure. Yeah. Number three, I want something that I'm going to call an asymmetric cost function. That means the person who is trying to enforce the Constitution should never be asked to pay a cost for being a volunteer in enforcing the Constitution. However, the person who violates the Constitution, if the court so holds, should be made to pay costs and perhaps pay the legal fees of the private solicitor general. Number 4, the court should avoid construing bright line rules. Bright line rules that are those that do not lend themselves to interpretation. For instance, the Constitution says if you are 18, you have the right to vote. Under no circumstance should the court say, well, yes, we know that if you are 18, you should be allowed to vote, but the people from this part of the country are not matured enough, and therefore, purposibly, they should be allowed to vote when they are 21. This happened in the Ayini case, where the requirement age is 60, and we have all kinds of games going on to uphold that somebody who is more than 60 can be appointed to hold office in public service. This destroys public confidence in the court.
All right.
How am I doing on time?
You have done 4. Your time is up already. We have done 2 minutes. No, we have done 2 minutes extra. I won't have a question for you. We have done 2 minutes extra. So if you can give us at least the next 5 of your points, just list them for us.
Well, 1, reform legal education and the profession. That's extremely important. 2, I think the justices are poorly resourced. They should be better resourced. 3, I think we should rationalize the panel system. Nobody knows how the panel system operates, but it's important because once the panel is chosen, the outcome of the case is almost always determined. The court should simplify judgments. Some of the judgments are too difficult for ordinary people to understand. The judges should avoid excessive entanglement with the political branches. Under no circumstance should the Attorney General or some other political person be seen going to the Chief Justice or another Supreme Court Justice to talk about anything. They should operate through the formal channels only. We need to reconsider the standard of proof in enforcing election petitions. I believe that the petitioner should have a burden of proving his case by prima facie evidence. And if he's able to do that, the burden should shift to the electoral manager who has all the records. And in my mind, the electoral manager should then rebut the case presented by the petitioner by the preponderance of evidence. I would even say perhaps by clear and convincing evidence.
Thank you, Thompson. I hope you can hear me
clearly.
Okay, I'm thankful for being invited to speak today. Coming in, though, as perhaps the 6th speaker in this remarkable lineup, I must say that I feel very much like the 5th wife of King Henry VIII. In that I know what is expected of me, but I'm not sure how to do it any differently. But I assure you, just like Henry VIII said to each of his wives, I shall not keep you long. I must warn you, though, that my intervention today is likely going to be rambling, so I hope you come to it expecting neither structure nor form. I originally intended it as a poem rather than a policy document. For me, it's a poem about resilience and the promise of a new Ghana. In that respect, I suspect that my intervention is likely to be quite different in tone than anything else you've heard today. Now, 8 months ago, I was a different person. I was a person preoccupied with different interests, mainly the philosophy of law and cognitive psychology. I was a person convinced, like many of my generation, that our democracy had not only failed, but was irremediably broken. We knew it needed fixing, that much we were certain of. Except between us, we understood intuitively that it was impossible to fix. And even if it wasn't, our politics will not allow it. It was too vicious. Innocent lives had been lost in the project to fix Ghana. Many had been maimed and communities left fractured. In many regards, those lost and broken lives served as a cautionary tale for why we citizens, or perhaps more accurately subjects, needed to remain pliant and toe the line. We knew to stay away from any ambitious projects of reimagining or pursuing a different vision for our society. Our parents raised us to be afraid of dreaming different. They made no virtue of bold defiance against a political system that had impoverished them and us. My generation was raised to give up. The price of our democracy is that it killed our imagination. It undermined our self-worth and made us distrust the legitimacy of our dreams. There's no denying that before Fix the Country, I too enjoyed the benefit of my relative anonymity. I was known only to those who knew me, and those who knew me well. I was hardly the object of public controversy, and Ghana's broken politics served only as a periodic distraction from a life I had a better grasp on. It was both peaceful and valued. It was a life that took me to working in the biggest law and policy firm in Washington, D.C., in close proximity with several officials who had served high-level roles in the Clinton and Obama administrations, including even Obama's former Attorney General Eric Holder, to the International Court of Justice and to the Legal Office of the United Nations. So in a sense, nothing was missing. And yet something was, if that makes sense. So Fix the Country deprived me of my anonymity and thrust me and perhaps the entire nation into a conversation that I think we can all agree came at a time we had not chosen. And yet it came too late. And in that, it was disruptive to my life and those of my fellow activists and to our professional engagements. At the time, we did not fully understand what we were signing up for. Fix the Country has aged me and the numerous others who volunteered to take up this charge twice as fast. And yet we took the blows and stood steadfast. You know, when Macho Kaka died, something died in me and the other Fix the Country activists that day and with him. We lost the desire to apologize for our advocacy, as well as the self-preservation instinct that thrives on stroking the egos of a political class that has taken this country hostage and is actively killing us, both literally and figuratively. When I set out to think through what I wanted to say today, I had contemplated talking to you about 7 reasons why I think Fix the Country will fail. You know, I'd given a talk along similar lines to the Socialist Solidarity Ghana, a group that had invited me to speak on social justice, youth activism, and democracy. And it seemed like an opportunity to refine my thoughts better on the subject and continue to tease out some of the dangers that lurk and continue to test Fix the Country's resilience, you know, as a vehicle for mobilizing and organizing working class people to take charge of our democracy. But some way, you know, midway, I decided to swap my pessimism for candor. So hear this and hear me well. Fix the Country is the bravest and boldest thing that has happened to our democracy in a very long time. It is the sum of our aspirations and evidence of our resilience as a people. Though we are beaten, we will not give up. It is the reminder that the moral arc of our nation's conscience, however long it takes, will eventually bend towards freedom and justice. That no matter how long it takes, the people of Ghana will triumph. May tomorrow's generations look back to these moments and say that their parents did this. And boy, did we make them proud. And they will feel a sense of pride that emboldens them to fight more and even more bravely. When the story of Fix the Country is told, I hope it will be of a generation that decided to fight against all odds. Because even as the power of the state has become so corrupted as to hunt us, to dismiss us from our jobs, to threaten our livelihoods, conduct illegal surveillance on us, and to shoot innocent civilians in their own communities. Even when the courts and the judicial process were weaponized to fight our quest for freedom, we stood tall. Ours is a story of 1,000 heartbeats linked together by a desire for change and a belief in the cause of righteousness. When we sang that God should make us bold to defend our nation and the cause of freedom and of rights, when nursery children today still studying under trees and in dilapidated classrooms, many years after our independence, sing the same songs. Fix the Country is what they sing of. When we sang that God make us cherish fearless honesty and help us to resist oppressors' rule, Fix the Country was the courage we sang for and the fearless honesty we yearned for. Can we then afford for Fix the Country to fail? This is a call to duty for all of us to shed the shyness and timidity of a generation past. For if we are to reform our democracy, we as citizens must show up. We must shut our ears to those whose stock in trade is to weaponize fear, partisanship, and ethnicity to derail our project. The youth and civic-minded people of this country must understand that time alone will not fix Ghana. Hoping that the benefit of time alone will improve governance in this country is to fail to learn from history. We can no longer afford to give time time. The people of Haiti had the same expectations of time when they became independent in 1804. Today, they are one of the poorest countries in the world. Liberia proclaimed its independence in 1848. Today, they are still one of the world's poorest. My fellow subjects, let us not underestimate the destructive power of generational greed and horrible ideas, as well as its ability to be twice as resilient as our quest for freedom. Bad ideas form political parties too. They mobilize people too. They compete for elections too. They form younger cadres, name them Pain or Tescon, and siphon out the soul of young people. They promise them that the public kitty will be theirs for the taking if they are patient and loyal, if they defend corruption with their might, if they insult journalists and abuse activists. The forces that hold this country back are so entrenched in everyday processes that we have become blind to them. To reform our democracy, good people can no longer afford to sit aloof. We cannot leave the burden of activism to a few individuals. Many young people today have put their lives on the line by volunteering their time and energy in the hopes of drawing attention to the fierce urgency of our poverty and those of our parents. We have pointed out the deceptions of this dictatorship of no alternatives that is hidden under the cloak of a superficial multipartisan democracy. Party politics has become a vehicle for rot, corruption, arrogance, and abuse of power. Our hospitals and our roads are killing us. Our school systems are preparing us to fail. Nothing works in this country. To get justice, you must pay for the police to come to your house and investigate the crime. You must go and find the suspect yourself, and you must pay for them to come and effect an arrest. You must pay for them to bring a suspect to court. You must pay for them to show up. This is not a democracy. This is a system that works for only those who are rich and notorious. Half of this country lives in kiosk and dilapidated buildings. There are more Ghanaians living below the poverty line than they did when we sacked the colonial oppressors. Selikem Timothy Donko just tweeted, "Governance is nothing if the people are suffering." We are a society without a vision. We are led by a political class that act like priests who have lost their faith but have continued to keep their jobs. We are a visionless society led by quacks who are not honest enough to admit they are in over their heads. And even if this country were to break down completely, our political class will steal the doorknob on the way out. This is the legacy of the Fourth Republic. This is the legacy of a 65-year-old nation. Can we then afford to fix the country to fail? We were lulled into a false sense of security, so we forgot to be vigilant. We are allowed in a new set of oppressors and a system of government based on structural inequity. We have created a political class that is greedy, vicious, and unrepentant. They then seize the opportunity to impoverish us. And when we demand more, they kill us. They kill us during elections and say we are armed robbers who are deserving of our death. They kill us at a jura and turn around and tell us we shot ourselves. If our deaths are meaningless to them, how much more our hunger and our poverty? If our deaths are meaningless to them, how much more our hunger and our poverty? You know, in the early beginnings of Fix the Country, I told you we were in a generational fight for the very soul of this nation. This is true today as it was true then. If we claim as subjects that our democracy gives us power, then we must be prepared to show that power, to trigger reform and brave democratic changes that this country urgently needs. We cannot leave our destiny in the hands of a political class that has shown us that we matter little to them. We must mute the conservatives who tell us that this is as good as it gets. For what does the rich and comfortable understand about the rage of a hungry and homeless generation? If we are to understand and deploy the real enormity of our power, we as a people need to stand together. I'm not talking about Kokromoti power. That's a myth. I'm talking about real power that only united action confers us. We need to stand up to show up. If we truly held power, we wouldn't be sitting aloof, expecting the same political class to initiate and design for us a different social contract, a new constitution that holds them to better account and restricts them even tightly than we are able to currently. If we truly held power, we would come together, mobilize together, work together, fundraise together, fight together. We will support Fix the Country and form other civic initiatives like it. We'll organize one of the biggest political protests this country has ever seen to demand for a better democracy, just like our compatriots in Egypt, Sudan, Tunisia did. Except we will do it better, for we are Ghanaians after all. Our soul yearns for excellence and we would achieve it. That is how other societies have progressed. That is how the French Revolution against the oppressive monarchy happened. This is what happened in England. Citizens showed up to demand a new politics. So I ask you today, will you stand with Fix the Country or will you allow it to fail through your apathy and continuing disinterest? Because that's the message your silence sends, that Fix the Country must fail. Thank you, Samson.
Good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. I've really loved hearing all the other speakers and the very thought-provoking statements that they've made. I would like to add to the conversation, and I hope that this is the beginning of an ongoing discussion that we have in the tertiary sector, but with society at large. I wanted to touch on two things. One is the role of universities in helping to deepen a culture of ethics in Ghanaian society. And the second is the role of universities in fostering innovation and entrepreneurship in order to drive private sector in Ghana. Now, in the spirit of this conversation this morning, I wanted to be conversational, provocative, share some ideas that I hope people will continue to discuss in the weeks and months ahead. So first, let's talk about ethics and why it's critical. And I thought that a way to demonstrate this would perhaps start with a thought exercise to demonstrate how important this is. And the thought exercise is quite simple. Let's imagine two societies. One society where everybody cheats, everybody lies, everybody's dishonest, and another society where everybody is honest and everybody is diligent. In the society where everybody cheats, parents cannot trust their children, children cannot trust parents, people cannot trust each other to do business. It'd be very difficult in such a society for people to get together to build anything of substance. We couldn't organize to build schools. We couldn't organize to build hospitals. We couldn't do business arrangements because everybody would cheat in those arrangements. And if they went to a judge to adjudicate violations, the judge would also cheat. Now, such a society, we can call that a dystopia. Such a society would not even be an agrarian society. Now, consider the other society where everybody is honest, where you have very high integrity and high trust. In such a society, you don't even need to have contracts in order to get together to do things. Such a society, people can build a lot of big, important things. They can build government, they can build schools, they can build hospitals, they can build businesses, they can create infrastructure. Now, when you think about these two societies, it's very clear that these two hypothetical societies, it's very clear that although we cannot have a total dystopia or a total utopia, that we should be leaning towards utopia. And the world has many examples and evidence of this. I want to share one because it's a very powerful one. It's sharing the experience of two islands, Haiti and Singapore. Haiti became independent in 1804. It's been independent for a very long time. Singapore became independent in 1959, 155 years after Haiti's independence. Haiti has not been able to build a high integrity, high trust society in all its years of independence. Corruption is rife, there's lots of government dysfunction, and today the per capita income in Haiti is is $1,900 a year. Compare that with Singapore. Independence in 1959, they built a very high integrity, high trust society, and today the per capita income is $64,000 a year per person. So I just thought, just to make it real, show that, demonstrate just with these two examples, that you actually build a tremendous amount of economic value by building integrity and trust in a society. So the question is, how do we foster that in our universities? I'll share a few ideas about how we might implement it and share from our experience at Ashesi University. Really, just 4 things. One is to have an enforced code of conduct. So a code of conduct that is not something written on paper, but is something that is lived and enforced by the institution. The second is the leaders, faculty, and staff modeling the right behavior. So behaviors around transparency, accountability, fairness, truthfulness. The third is curriculum reform that encourages students, compels students, in fact, to be engaged in intellectual questions around what constitutes a good society, what is integrity, and why is it important. And I use the word and intellectual engagement very deliberately. You cannot get students to imbue these values if you just preach at them, or you just tell them it is so. There must be an engagement where they're processing and understanding why this is important. And then the fourth is to embed the values into the culture of the organization. Now, 20 years ago, when we started Ashesi University, there were many people who said to me that it is impossible to establish a deep culture of integrity in an institution of higher learning. But actually, it is not as difficult as it appears to change culture at a university, especially the culture within a student body. And here's why. The student body of any university completely turns around every 4 years. The student body of a high school turns around every 3 years. It means that within a 4-year period, you can completely change the culture of an organization, of an educational organization at the higher ed level. And the way you do it is you engage very strongly with the entering class, the first-year students. Have to have a very deep immersion in the conversations and experiences that I described. And you should also bookend it by engaging with the final year students, especially those in student government. But if you do this consistently, then over a period of 4 years, you'll be amazed that you can have a completely different culture on a university campus. Some people have also said to me, but Patrick, it's easy for you to do it at Ashesi because it is a smaller organization. In a very large university, it is virtually impossible to do. And I would suggest to them that large universities have colleges, they have schools, they have departments. And so you can, again, engage in the same way at a departmental level or the level of a college, which is smaller, and achieve the result that you want within a 4-year period. I think it's a very interesting and exciting time today in Ghana in higher ed. There's a lot of changes happening. You see, the phenomenon that Professor Techiwamenu mentioned about, what's happening with women in leadership at our universities. It's a very exciting time, and we could, if we wanted to, and if we were committed, engage in a way that really changes the game of higher education and builds the kinds of citizens and leaders that our society needs. Imagine if we had started this project 20 years ago, where we would be now, when those 20-year-olds in our classrooms are now 40-year-olds and are heading important institutions in our country. The second thing I wanted to talk about was innovation and how important the private sector is. Again, a very simple thought exercise to begin the conversation. Just think about some of the products and innovations that we take for granted today that have dramatically extended and enriched human life. Things like antibiotics, which doubled human life expectancy just over the last 100 years alone, and other medicines. Think about the refrigerator, the automobile, mobile phones and the internet, agriculture. All of these things are provided by the efforts of individual inventors, entrepreneurs, farmers, the private sector. They're not provided by government. Now, these individuals and these organizations earn money from the value that they've added in society. They pay some of that money as taxes to the government and thereby fund the government. And then governments provide an enabling environment, and in some cases even fund the fundamental research and development that creates a virtuous cycle within the private sector and the public sector. We've also seen over the last 100 years that any society that suppresses its private sector quickly finds itself in very difficult economic conditions. In fact, we've experienced this in Ghana. We've had parts of our history in my lifetime. The private sector came under tremendous pressure from the government, and our per capita income dropped. People were hungry as farms collapsed, businesses collapsed. The societies that have the most innovation in the private sectors also have the lowest unemployment rates, they have the highest GDP, and they have the strongest governments. It is critically important that we enable the private sector, that we enable innovation in the private sector. So again, what role can universities play in achieving that? The first and most obvious one, of course, is that we educate people. And we need to educate them to have an entrepreneurial mind. And by that I mean, we need to educate people to have curiosity, to have creativity, the ability to search for multiple solutions to problems, and to explore different solutions to problems. In fact, one could argue that anybody who only sees one solution to a problem does not fully understand the problem. If you truly understand the problem, you will come up with multiple solutions that are viable. We need to educate people who have the courage to take risks, who have the courage to act, and to persist through difficulty. That is the business of universities. The second is research and development. Now, of course, we need strong research, we need strong development, and I would say that in the context of Ghana, it would be wise to lean towards the development part of that equation. Of the R&D equation, we should do more D than R. Why do I say this? Well, there's already a lot of fundamental research that's been done in the world over the years, and we can borrow from that fundamental research, apply it to our own circumstance, and really focus on development, and then get to fundamental research later on. So given our context, that would be, I think, a wise thing for us to do. The second thing around research is that I think that it would be wise for us to focus on a few key areas and put our entire weight behind those few areas. The question is, how do you select what areas to focus on? This is a very important question. And I would like to suggest a few criteria that we might consider in making that decision. One is go to industry and understand what their needs are. What are the most pressing needs today? What are the most pressing needs that they foresee for themselves in the next 10 years or 20 years? And let's, as universities, focus our attention around solving those problems for industry. The second is that we should consider the opportunities that come from the fourth industrial revolution. And by this, I mean that the world is going through a sea change. It's a dramatic shift in the technologies that are coming in the world. And when you have such a shift happening, it is an opportunity for everybody to literally be starting from an even playing field. So looking at the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution and focusing on those areas as things that we pay attention to. The third is to think about the challenges that come with climate change. For example, Ghana depends very heavily on the cocoa industry for foreign exchange. We have to consider what will happen to our cocoa farms and the cocoa industry when temperatures rise. We need to be doing the research now and the work now to make sure that our agriculture will not fail in the face of climate change. That's a way of saying, well, this is an important area for our economy. This is a new phenomenon in the world, or an old phenomenon that we're now understanding in the world. We should pay attention to it. And finally, on the question of climate change, we should also consider the opportunities that come from it. Opportunities? Well, here's what I mean. We know that there is going to be a dramatic change in the energy architecture of the world in the coming years. We know that manufacturing in the world is going to shift from its current posture to green manufacturing. In other words, manufacturing plants are increasingly going to move to areas and countries that have more green energy. This is an opportunity for Africa as a continent to take the lead. There is no reason why we should not be the ones who are actively leading the charge for a new energy architecture to renewable energy, and thereby positioning ourselves to be the place where manufacturing will move to as the world tackles the issues of climate change. Now, of course, this last thing that I described would require a major effort on the continent. It is the kind of project that would take more than $1 trillion to accomplish. And so it will require concerted effort by governments to fund the kinds of research that we need to make it happen. Now, I've just shared a few thoughts on how universities can engage on the question of ethics, the question of innovation. I think these two areas are critically important for the advancement of our society. And at Ashesi University, we're very anxious to connect with other universities in engaging in these questions. Today, we've set up, we have a collaborative of universities across a continent that now has 73 universities participating in it, where we share ideas with each other, share curriculum, share pedagogy. We share all kinds of things. And I think this, again, is a way for our universities working in collaboration with each other to make a profound change in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samson. And I have enjoyed all the speeches made so far, great insights from all the panelists so far that they have made. Now, before I go to what I have to say for today, I want to make a comment, which is that laws alone, no matter how humanly perfect, will not secure for any nation the blessings of liberty, accountability, and prosperity. And that no laws, no matter how robust, by themselves would be able to secure for any country what they aspire to be. What is the case, though, is that it is laws coupled with the practice and adherence to democratic values that will secure for us the blessings of liberty, accountability, and prosperity. And that the progress of any society depends very much on the laws they enact, one, for themselves, two, the values with which they enforce these laws, and then their willingness to constantly review and revise both the laws and the values in line with our aspirations. And I say this because, as I always tell my students, the truth of the matter is that a law, no matter how new, is just a piece of paper. It is the institutions, the values, and the persons who give life to the law. So that piece of paper in itself will not eradicate poverty. It will not promote equality. It will not promote inclusiveness. It will do absolutely nothing if we do not enforce those laws in accordance with the values of our society. And those values must be in line with the aspirations that we have for ourselves. Having said this, I now proceed to what I have to say today.
Conflict of interest and social protection.
Exactly. On other occasions, I have pointed out what I consider as the shortcomings of our Constitution. Today, however, I am not going to dwell on the shortcomings of our Constitution. Today, I choose to look at some positives, at least 2 articles, which will help us to promote equality, promote inclusiveness of our society, secure social cohesion, citizenship building, promoting human capital, and achieving equitable and sustainable development. And I make 2 requests, one of the President and the second of Parliament, particularly the Speaker of Parliament. Now, my request to the President or the Executive, and this request relates to Article 36 of our Constitution, which borders on the review and passage of the Social Protection Bill. And this is my request. The request is that in line with Article 108 of the Constitution, the President will cause to be introduced in Parliament the Social Protection Bill upon consideration of civil society's input for the review of the Social Protection Bill. As we may be aware, social protection is increasingly considered globally as a human right. It has a basis in the 1992 Constitution, which is Article 36 of the Constitution, and it is definitely secured as well by international obligations that Ghana has signed up to. To our credit, we do have a draft bill. So there is a social protection draft bill. If you look at the aims of the Gender and Social Protection Ministry, it was hoped that this bill would have been passed in 2019, but it has not as at yet, to the best of my knowledge, been introduced in Parliament. So I would like to make a request to the Parliament, to the President, to cause to be introduced into Parliament this bill, and then, of course, taking into consideration the views made by civil society as input in this bill. I have myself authored a policy brief on this bill, as well as, and there are other people, both in academia and civil society, who have offered input for the review of this bill to be passed in Parliament. Why this bill is important to us is that we do need to protect the most vulnerable of our society. And that is what the Social Protection Bill seeks to do. It seeks to secure both a legal, regulatory, as well as financial legal framework for the implementation of social protection, so that we can capture the most vulnerable of our society, provide them assistance that they need to be able to exploit the talents that they have, in which talents at the end of the day will help to promote the human capital of our country. And of course, it will help us in our economic, social, and financial.
Thank you very much, Samson, for the opportunity. Like previous speakers, I'd say this has been one of the most interesting news file that we've had, allowing people to share their views, especially in this year of 2022, and how we would like to see the year go forward. The thrust of my statement really is directed at the youth, and I'm looking at speaking about igniting values in our youth for a great and strong Ghana. Clara has spoken about values, Patrick has spoken about ethics, but I think previous speakers have also spoken about various topics, and all of it, I think at the basis of it is the issue of values. I choose to address the youth particularly because of our recent population and housing census that tells us that we have a real huge youth bulge. And so they, for us, should be the most important asset and how do we transform this great asset to catapult national development. I'd like to open by talking or referring to a quote from Tom Daley, and he said that until we begin to discover the national values that for centuries have allowed us to rise above our natures and act as civilized men and women, our country will continue to suffer the steady deterioration in standards that disturbs us all. Tom Daley is American, or was American, but I am very confident that his sentiments resonate with the context that we live in the Ghana today. Our previous speakers have spoken about justice. We want the law to work. We want to realize the potential of both men and women as equal in governing our nation. We want patriotic citizens who speak truth to power. We desire the rule of law and not selective justice. We want improved systems of goods and services available to all equally. And we also want quality education that fosters innovation and development premised on ethical values. And Clara just spoke about social protection. Values really propel nation building and they engender the transformation for a prosperous nation. Our Constitution tells us that we want to secure for ourselves the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity. And all that we've spoken about really rests on these three cardinal blessings that as a sovereign people, we chose as the blessings that we want to guide us in terms of our well-being and living in a country such as ours. The values of integrity, honesty, discipline, self-governance, hard work, service to humanity, patriotism, the pursuit of excellence must guide us all in the various facets of life, whether it is home, work, education, religion, media, sports, arts, science and research, business and economic affairs, and finally, governance and politics. Undoubtedly, anchoring the values alluded to in every facet of life is what will give us the blessings that we have desired for ourselves. My view really is that we are at a precipice as a nation. Either we hold on tightly to these values and propel national development through our burgeoning youth, or we tumble and fall into constitutional apathy, a loss of value system that defines us as a people. We have to reconscientize the Ghanaian. We must be deliberate and intentional about it, and I would therefore charge leaders. I just wrap up and say, charge leaders that if we're going to be intentional, deliberate, and purposeful in our quest to be strong, great and strong, in our quest to secure for ourselves these blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity, then we must act in concert as Ghanaians. I charge the Minister of Education that we should have a policy and action plan with clearly devised strategies that anchor our education in the values that are targeted at real internalization of values in our youth, so that they can lead the country to the great transformation to be a great and strong nation.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Josephine Nkrumah, Chairperson, National Commission for Civic Education, NCCE.